And today, I had intended to talk about the many faces of stress, but given the fact that today is a very special day in terms of our history. In fact, let's talk about the pink elephant in the room. Today is 9/11, and I have no intention of picking scabs or trivializing the event itself or the effects of the event, but I do want to uh, basically embrace all of the people that have been affected by this, close to the source and as far away as every other country in the world being affected by the events that occurred on 9/11 to one extent or another. And obviously, even at this point in time, my heart goes out to you and to everyone that's been affected by this. And, I want to take a moment for those of you I've not had the pleasure of meeting before today, to give you a brief background. I'm Dr. Richard DeCenso, CEO of Matrix Transformation, creator and developer of an evaluation process called the Matrix Assessment Profile, or the MAP. And obviously, we're going to be talking a little bit about that evaluation process, how it relates to the concept of stress as we engage the process of stress, its many faces, and the impact that it can have on your day-to-day lives. Now, obviously, stress, in terms of a definition, may be relatively hard to express simply because everyone on this call recognizes what the word stress means, and it means something different to every one of us. And it means something different in terms of what happens, when it happens, and how it impacts our lives at various stages. So we all experience some version of stress from long before we're born, from the time that we're being incubated, so to speak, in terms of the environment that we exist in the womb, in terms of the parents' attitudes, the parents' relationship, the mother's diet, the mother's beliefs, the mother's expectations, the stress, the anxiety, the depression that goes along with, wow, I'm going to have a baby. And that contributes to the environment in utero and ultimately is going to impact the biological environment of the child once it's born, simply because, as I've said many times before, you and I and everyone on this planet are the biological end products of our interpretation of our perceptions. Now, obviously, this is something that's going to change over the course of a lifetime as well, simply because as a young child, we don't have those same tools, those same strategies, those same opportunities, if you will, to be able to interpret our perceptions in a way that we might have at 8 years old, 10 years old, 17 years old, 40 years old, 70 years old, or whatever. And so the point of this is that as we go through a lifetime, we're constantly confronted with opportunities to engage the effects, the impacts of stress. But one of the questions that inevitably is going to come up is, when is stress a cause and when is it an effect? And then that effect, in fact, can become a cause. And so within the context of the Matrix Assessment Profile, this becomes very significant because part of the assessment process is obviously a health history and obviously a symptom survey. And when an individual seems to dwell for an extended period of time on things that are in fact related to the effects of stress, then obviously this is going to impact the biological environment. It's going to impact behaviors. It's going to impact thoughts, feelings, emotions, activities, and ultimately the results that you get, depending upon the way that you choose to engage, interpret, and embrace this nebulous concept of stress. And so, in essence, stress means something different to everyone on this planet. And in saying that, we have to recognize, appreciate, and simply acknowledge the fact that stress is not a simple entity that can be defined by everyone and anyone and agreed upon by anyone, because there are individuals who tolerate the effects, the impact of stress in many different ways, including just walk it off, a popular misnomer, if you will. And good luck if you've tried that. I know I have on occasions. But also, one of the reasons I'm even discussing this issue today is the fact that statistically 90% of all visits to a doctor's office are in fact stress related. And so how does this all work? What is it that we can go, what can we do beyond identifying what it is that creates a stressful moment for us? In other words, knocks us off of our equilibrium, causes us momentarily to lose our direction, to lose our balance, if you will. And what are the tools and strategies that are available and are effective in terms of managing the effects of stress? Well, as with everything else, particularly within the concept of the matrix assessment profile, this is going to vary in terms of being the right thing at the right time, in the right order, in order for the cause to be identified and effectively negotiated. Now, obviously, when we're talking about psychological and emotional stress, even spiritual stress, we've got some deeper concepts that need to be considered. Those being the developmental trauma that is associated with stress, the impact of shock trauma, which is easily demonstrated by the events that occurred many years ago on 9/11, but still have an impact on the people who were close, who lost loved ones, who were impacted, affected by this ongoingly, even to this point in time. And the degree to which this developmental and shock trauma, which is a rare situation, combine to alter the function of the central nervous system, alter the results that we evaluate in the biochemistry, evaluate the physical integrity of the body, and obviously the impact that it has on our thoughts, our feelings, our emotions, and our behaviors. And so, depending upon how we choose to look at this, we can look at something like the Framingham study on cardiovascular disease. And in doing that, we recognize a couple of things, that there are different ways of interpreting perceptions regarding something as seemingly simple as stress. Now, this particular study disclosed a wide variety of potential risk factors, and those risk factors were assumed to be the cause of cardiovascular disease. Now, having reviewed those results decades after this study was initiated, and to some degree it was embraced by the healthcare community at large, when we look at the results of that, again, in a different way, which also is part of the matrix assessment evaluation process, looking at things that nobody else is looking at in ways that nobody else is looking at them, we see something entirely different. So in this particular study, what we see and what we found to be true was the fact that all of these potential risk factors were in fact effects of choices, of behaviors, of beliefs. And when we clear away the debris associated with these potential risk factors, what we see and what we saw is simply that it boils down to two simple issues being at the root cause of all of these potential risk factors and the behaviors associated with them. And those two issues are lack of self-esteem and lack of self-satisfaction and lack of job satisfaction. So lack of self-satisfaction, lack of job satisfaction being close to the cause for behaviors associated with things that ultimately created compromises in the physical, in the biological, in the psychological and emotional environments that produce symptoms of cardiovascular disease. Now, this is across the board true with many other studies, many other pieces of research, many other papers that have been written over the decades. And now, as we evolve into more substantial research, more consolidated research, more advanced and evolved ways of looking at this kind of information, we're starting to see how much of this really comes down to personal choices, personal interpretation of perceptions, what kind of skills, strategies, tools, and techniques we have available and choose to implement on a day-to-day basis in order to negotiate the waters of stress, but also in order to be able to identify, to observe, to embrace, and to neutralize the stress impact at a causal level. Now, as many of you already know, the matrix assessment profile is a biological fluid analysis, or it involves a biological fluid analysis. Now, this means that when you choose to have this evaluation performed, you're requesting a small kit for the purpose of collecting urine and saliva samples, which you send back to our office, along with a health history and a symptom survey. Typically, the realm of individuals who have been suffering for a long time with some kind of chronic, unresolved symptom complex that has either been undiagnosed or misdiagnosed. And they're really looking for answers as to what is it that's causing me to experience this, and what is it that I can do finally to resolve the impact, the effects of this constant gnawing away at the integrity of my life. Well, one of the most effective tools, strategies, techniques for evaluating chronic and non-responsive symptoms at the level of cause is, in fact, the matrix assessment profile, the MAP, based on a couple of concepts. If you don't change directions, for instance, you're going to end up where you're headed, kind of obvious. Also, in the words of Hippocrates, it doesn't matter what the symptoms are, what the diagnosis is, what the disease is, what the disorder is. What matters far more is the person, the individual who is experiencing these disorders, these diseases, these discomforts, these imbalances, these compromises. And so in order to effectively arrive at cause, other than something obvious where you've had an accident, where you've had some kind of physical trauma, where you've had something occur that temporarily disrupts the continuity of your life, but ultimately is resolved and you just move on. Whether or not you choose to incorporate the impact, the effects of that circumstance, that situation into your neurology, into your biochemistry, into your physical structure is simply going to be different for every single person. So within the context of the matrix assessment profile, what we're seeing is that there are three possible realms of influence that cause or contribute to chronic and unresolved symptoms. And typically, these are people that have been everywhere, done everything, seen everybody, and they're being told things like, well, we can't find anything wrong. All your tests are normal. The symptoms are normal for your age. We have to wait and see. We've got to run more tests, or the symptoms are all in your head. Now, satisfying as this may be, or unsatisfying for that matter, it still does not bring us any closer to identifying a cause or a solution. And the whole point of the matrix assessment profile is to turn symptoms into solutions by identifying the cause. Now, I said earlier that we have three possible realms of influence that can cause or contribute to compromises, imbalances, deficiencies that will be clearly demonstrated in the results of the matrix assessment profile and the related evaluation process. Now, those three realms include the physical realm, which are things like exercise, lack of exercise, diet, traumatic incidents, physical incidents, accidents, if you will, physical trauma, posture, breathing. And then we have the realm of biochemistry, which can be impacted and affected by physical compromises, demonstrated by compromises in the biochemistry, but then we have biochemical compromises that can in fact be at the source, at the root, at the level of cause in terms of producing effects in the physical body, in the psychological and emotional realm, which is the third realm, that of the virtual realm, unseen, undetectable, outside of the realm of symptoms, meaning that this involves psychological, emotional, and even spiritual compromises. And so in knowing this, we have a more concise, a more consolidated foundation upon which to evaluate the source of chronic and unresolved symptoms. So how does all of this relate to stress? Well, simply that if in fact you are experiencing chronic and unresolved symptoms, you are experiencing stress. And so there are a multitude of strategies for negotiating the effects of stress. Now, a lot of this is going to be determined by what the cause of the stress is. So if it's an obvious stress, then the management is relatively obvious as well. You broke a bone, we put you in a cast, we wait for the bones to heal, we allow your body to do what it does innately. The body is healed and you move on with or without some physical compromises. If they're more intense in terms of things like respiratory alkalosis, things involving the respiratory system, things involving the production of certain hormones, certain substances, certain things that are part of the concept of respiratory alkalosis, such as decreased availability of oxygen as a result of depleted CO2 levels related to the inability or unavailability of hemoglobin or the binding capacity of hemoglobin, and or the insufficient production of nitric oxide, which then will take a different course in terms of the symptoms ultimately produced. But what if we could actually see these mechanisms and see these discrepancies and see these compromises and imbalances and deficiencies at that level? How much further, how much closer would we be to resolving the eventual symptoms associated with things like dementia, Alzheimer's, IBS, cardiovascular diseases, hypoglycemia, things associated with psychological and emotional compromises, having identified the fact that what you're experiencing may in fact be a consequence of developmental trauma that's accumulated, that's trapped in your central nervous system, that's triggering hyperactivity in the global high intensity activity associated with the gas pedal in your nervous system, the sympathetic nervous system, as opposed to the braking system, the parasympathetics. So you've got both feet on the gas pedal, so to speak. And then what if it's just a relationship, if it's a financial situation, if it's the loss of a loved one? What if the source of the stress is an event, which inevitably it's going to be, it's something that is incongruent with what it is that you believe or that you expect to be able to experience as you move through life, but in fact, something different occurs and it throws you off base, it throws you off balance. It gives you the opportunity, but it also creates two opportunities. One of them is for you to observe, to investigate, to eliminate, to negotiate, to implement tools, strategies, and techniques for negotiating the effects, the impacts, but it also creates the opportunity for you to develop what's called learned helplessness, which simply means that you become so impacted, so affected, so controlled by the source of this trauma, of this stress, that you now have completely lost control. You've lost the ability to even consider that this is a situation for which there is a potential solution. This is part of the encouragement that exists within the confines of the matrix assessment profile. Now, I'm not saying that this is a panacea, because there are no panaceas. And if you've had the opportunity or taken the opportunity to read any part of my last book, Beyond Medicine, Exploring a New Way of Thinking, In the beginning, in the introduction to that book, I disclose 7 specific guidelines. I call them caveats that I use to maintain perspective when I'm looking at the things that you describe to me in your intake form, that you describe to me as being the things that concern you the most: the joint pain, the inability to sleep through the night, the lack of mental clarity, the inability to lose weight, digestive symptoms, psychological symptoms, medications that you've been taking for an extended period of time that, well-intentioned as they were, have now accumulated to the point where they've disrupted other systems. They've created a dependency on the part of your body, and they have contributed to additional compromises on every level: the physical, the biological, the psychological, the emotional. So all of these things are inherently part of the evaluation process known as the MAP. Now, that aside, stress, as you probably were well aware before I got on today, but if you weren't, you are now. Stress is something that has multiple faces. It can show up in any way, shape, or form. It can affect everybody in a unique and different way. And it can ultimately disrupt the coherency of everything that occurs in your life from the point of experiencing whatever it is that you interpret and perceive as a stress. So one of the most important things that we can do for ourselves is to take care of ourselves, because in that stressed state, you see things, symptoms emerging like anxiety, like depression, like weight gain, like lethargy, like fatigue, like just inability to function normally, lack of focus, lack of concentration. All of these things that have for a long time been assigned their own individual diagnosis and their diagnostic code, and you've been labeled with these symptoms as a disease process, when in fact, these are all part of who you are. And until and unless we know who you are and we understand how you function in regards to, in response to stressful, traumatic, disruptive situations and circumstances in your life, then all we're doing is treating symptoms. And that, my friend, is not in any way, shape, or form even closely related to the point of the matrix assessment profile. So stress obviously is overwhelming, can be overwhelming, but there are some very powerful tools, techniques, strategies that we can implement on a day-to-day basis. And in saying that, one of the most important things that I just said is on a day-to-day basis. That means commitment. It means consistency. It means dedication to things that are known to be effective in terms of altering your interpretation of your perception. And so there are simple things like obviously exercise, obviously diet, obviously supplementation. Oftentimes we have to reverse engineer what it is that we're attempting to implement in terms of moving you from the symptoms to the solutions by introducing some of these changes. But they aren't necessarily always associated with remedying, assuaging, neutralizing any of these symptoms at the level of cause. And so in saying that, all of these things are important, because one of the other caveats in my book is that everything works, which means everything works. So whether your beliefs, which we call a premature cognitive commitment, which is simply you found something that sounds good, that you believe in, or even that you've gotten results from. And so now that's the thing. This is the diet. These are the supplements. This is the company. This is the tool, the strategy, the technique. And if that works for you, excellent. But if there's any doubt in your mind, or if you plateau ultimately as a consequence of incorporating something that you believed was going to be the solution, then obviously you either need to change directions, or you're going to end up where you're headed, or we need to modify as we often do with some of the protocols that I construct for taking people from symptoms to solutions. Now, there is an ideal model, of course, outside of the realm of the keto diet, the Mediterranean diet, this diet, the paleo diet, the other diet, the weight loss strategy, the miracle supplement, the eat these 5 foods and you'll live forever, longevity strategies. And all of these things work, but the point of that particular caveat, everything works, is that everything works, but everything works most effectively when it's applied to a specific set of circumstances for which it's most indicated, which simply means it's the right thing at the right time in the right order. Now, when we're dealing with any of the effects of stress that impact us over an extended period of time, this is, in fact, a chronic and unresolved symptom. So is it legitimate to say, well, I'm stressed out? Well, yeah, temporarily it is legitimate, and it is a very common effect of anything that disrupts your continuity of life as you know it, or as you believe it should be, or as your expectations lead you to believe that your life should be. Now, all of these things, of course, need to be examined as a part of the process of refining your approach to turning these symptoms into solutions. But where do we start? Well, one of the other caveats is when you hear hoofbeats, look for horses, which means start where you are. Let's start with the obvious. Let's reverse engineer what is necessary at the obvious level, move closer to identifying the cause as we pull back the curtain on your symptoms, and hopefully at some point in the process, implement a tool, strategy, technique, or group of them that is relatively stable, is relatively effective, that is relatively consistent with what's going to work for you in the long term. And some of these are relatively well accepted at this point. They're well known, and we can sit here all day and talk about all the fascinating studies, the results of these studies, particularly from recent years, and especially this last year, 2018, when there were over 50,000 studies produced testifying to the impact, the effects of things like brain waves on your virtual, biological, physical health and well-being. Now, this runs the gamut in terms of brainwave phenomenons, if you will. This is the realm of neurology, of neuroscience, of psychoneuroimmunology. All of these things are fascinating. They're great words to have in your vocabulary. They're neat to talk about, but they don't really describe what the impact, what the tools are, what the strategies are, what the techniques are, and why they work. And having said that, because everything works, one of our goals is to identify what's the right thing for you in the right order at the right time that's going to produce this equilibrium that's been disturbed as a result of some event, situation, circumstance in your life that's disrupted your peace, your joy, your happiness. All of these things are associated with these compromises, these imbalances, and these deficiencies. So is it a nutrient deficiency? Is it an organ, tissue, gland dysfunction? Is it a biochemical compromise? Is it a structural imbalance, a structural compromise, a structural discrepancy that's causing or contributing to biochemical imbalances, creating psychological, emotional, and spiritual conflicts, indescribable from the point of view of symptoms, but not so within the context of the matrix assessment profile. And so what we know now are simple things, and they're fascinating to talk about and to describe, but in and of themselves simply do not encompass the full realm of possibilities, if you will. But developing a daily discipline is going to be critical to determining, to ultimately achieving what it is that we want to achieve, which is the elimination of the cause that's contributing to the symptoms that you're experiencing. One of the fascinating groups of studies is obviously on the impact of the brain and the mind on our day-to-day well-being, the integrity of our day-to-day experiences. And we have a lot of information. We have a lot of knowledge about how these things work, and we can extrapolate because of the ever-evolving fields of physics and quantum physics as to what the implications are, how these things might work, how they might impact our well-being and the integrity of our day-to-day lives. But in fact, if we don't chunk it down and take some part of it and use some of the tools associated with it that are relatively inexpensive, a lot of them are free, and begin to implement them as part of the daily discipline, then the rest of it is a moot point. You're going to diet, lose weight, gain the weight back. You're going to feel better, have energy, deplete yourself. You're going to structurally improve your ability to perform a particular function, and you're going to regress. You're going to backslide. You're going to lose it because the foundation is not secured, and it has a lack of integrity in terms of being multifaceted. And so simple things that we know now that are important to know and to understand are things like the neurology, for instance, the concept of neuroplasticity, meaning that you can grow new brain cells, which we thought was never possible, that you can actually consciously, intentionally participate in the process of creating new neural pathways associated with any behavior, any experience, any ultimate outcome that you choose. But there's some things that are associated with accomplishing that. Things like consistency, things like discipline, things like focus, things like attention, things like concentration. All of these things are important as a part of developing whatever program is going to work for you, whether the emphasis is on biochemistry, whether it's on structure, or whether it's on psychological, emotional, and spiritual events that will inevitably occur and impact us during the course of a lifetime. Now, we also have interesting facts associated with this concept of neuroplasticity, such as that the neural tubes, the neural foundation, the neural structure of these pathways can double within 1 hour of focus, concentration, discipline, involving one of a variety of techniques. Once again, there are no panaceas. This can involve prayer. It can involve contemplation. It can involve meditation. It can be done in as little as 3 minutes a day, 10 minutes even better. And when you get to the point where you're beginning to see results, you can expand that to a period of time that you're comfortable with and see even more results. And then you begin to see the synchronicities that previously you thought were coincidences, but you've actually participated in creating and contributing to your own solution. So something as simple as meditation, for instance, we're now seeing that if we use a tool similar to a personal EEG machine. There's one that I happen to like and one that I happen to use on a day-to-day basis simply because it's relatively inexpensive and it's very detailed in terms of suggesting to me where my mind might be wandering or my brain waves might be wandering during the course of an alleged meditation, and demonstrate to me where I'm still hitting the wall, if you will. And something as simple as monitoring the various stages of brainwave frequencies that I won't go into today, but just for your reference, you can look at them, you can Google them after we get off this call. They're delta, theta, alpha, beta, which has 2 levels, low beta and high beta, and then gamma, which is that arena of, oh my God, this is so blissful, this is just so enjoyable, I wish it could last forever. But then one of the other concepts associated with feeling good and feeling bad is that everything passes. And so clinging to that which you really want to experience or hanging on to that which is producing a negative experience for you are equally as impactful. And that boils down to a matter of choice. But what we're seeing with the recent studies, and I'm talking about something that I've been exposed to within the last 4 to 6 weeks, is that implementing a simple discipline like meditation, contemplation, prayer, focused concentration, attention, because energy flows where attention goes, because what you focus on expands. When you give these areas of your life the attention that they deserve in terms of the power that they potentially possess relative to altering, changing, impacting in a productive and positive way everything that you want to experience in your life, then it's not a choice anymore. It is a must do, but something that's very powerful, very impactful. In fact, the recent studies that I've been exposed to within the last 4 to 6 weeks suggest that within a matter of 4 weeks, you can reduce the impact of stress, regardless of what it is, where it's originating, what the cause is. You can reduce the impact of stress by between 20 and 30% within 4 weeks. Just 4 weeks. What an investment. No money, nothing but time. Don't even need the personal EEG. This can be done with something as simple as sound wave intervention, if you will, because once again, the energetic waves that we don't have time to go into today, but I'll certainly keep it on the front burner as a topic for future dialogues, have 100 times more of an impact on the cells in the body than any biochemical, biological, pharmacological element known to man at this point in our history, which means that if you're taking something, whether it's a supplement or pharmaceutical, it's going to have 100 times less of an impact than the probability, the likelihood, the statistical likelihood that something as potent as a brief period of time in the mornings before you drift out of that sleep state, the alpha state, are going to be able to impact your day and, done on a regular basis, impact the direction of your life over a matter of 3 to 4 weeks. What in the world could a matter of 3 to 4 months produce, let alone 3 or 4 years? So obviously this is worth looking at. It's worth the investment in time and whatever money is involved at that point, because altering this foundational approach, altering the strategy that you implement, altering the tools and the techniques that you modify, you integrate, you segregate in terms of what's most important at what particular point in time, and in what order should I do this thing. Start with something simple, something that has the possibility, something that has the power, something that has the potency to alter your life experience at a very fundamental level. Now, having looked at some studies produced by NASA a number of years ago, in which they were working with astronauts, one of the results of those studies was that it took somewhere between 26 and 41 days to alter the functional capacity, the neuroplasticity of productive brain wave pathways. Now, looking at that research in a little bit more detail, I took some of the tools that NASA was working with, and I took some of the strategies that they had developed in terms of impacting the minds of the astronauts involved in this study, and I was able to assemble them, incorporate them into a specific dialogue that I call dichotic dissertation. Simply another word for a process. But what I did was I took these specific sounds, these specific brainwave frequencies, I incorporated them into an audio dialogue. I superimposed relaxing sounds, the beach, the wind, birds chirping, and I integrated a verbal dialogue, superimposed this dialogue on what they call binaural beats, on the foundation of these various sound wave frequencies and created individual and specific dialogues associated with behaviors that people deliberately wanted to change. For instance, one for weight loss, one for sleep, one for stress. And I used my voice superimposed on all of these audible potentials, this audible foundation, and created a story associated with what people wanted to experience as change. And so initially you hear my voice talking about someone walking along the beach, someone walking through the forest, someone climbing up the side of a mountain. And then my voice disappears, the sounds come back, all of the binaural beats and the brainwave frequencies escalate temporarily until your awareness, your consciousness is focused on those elements, exposing the sheer matter of your brain to frequencies that have the potential 100 times more than anything you could take in terms of a mind-altering substance to create that same environment with simply sounds, with your breathing. And then as the sounds begin to dissipate, my voice comes back on in these dialogues. And my voice comes back in both ears at the same time, telling two entirely different stories, one in each ear. But the way the stories are designed are very specific in terms that the story in the right ear is one about someone walking down the beach, walking through the forest, climbing the side of the mountain. But where I pause in the first story in the right ear, the second story going on simultaneously in the left ear is about somebody doing something entirely different. But where I pause in the right ear and I begin in the left ear with the stories, those two stories audibly come together to form a third story in your subconscious mind, but audible to your conscious mind. So you're hearing this third story. So you're hearing me stop on the word stress in the right ear, and you're hearing me begin in the left ear with the word less. And so the message becomes stress less. But you're hearing these words now in an environment where your conscious mind has been fatigued. You're receptive now because of the verbal dialogue and the brainwave frequencies to the third story, to the impact of the audible brainwave frequencies embedded in the audio. And with just 5, 7, 9, 12 minutes a day of simply listening to these processes, we've developed new neural bundles within an hour. We've developed new neural pathways that ultimately will be permanently part of your brain matter, physically, organically, structurally, in a matter of 21 to 46 days, ultimately impacting interpretation of perception, the manner in which electrochemical impulses are translated from the five senses to your brain, interpreted by your body, by your mind, incorporated into your biochemistry, and ultimately integrated into your physical structure as a part of the strategy, a part of the tools that are now available for making sense out of your world, for neutralizing the impact, the effects of this chronic exposure to stress. And this is just one of the many tools and strategies and techniques available. But once again, something that I'm at this point in time actually putting together as a package for any of those on the call or who listen to this after the call, before the next call, who might be interested in knowing more about it or experiencing this process for yourself. By all means, hit the wow button, hit the like button, or shoot us an email. Make us aware of the fact that this is something that you want to know more about, so that we're not just throwing it up against the wall and invading your privacy and soliciting you in some undesirable or unwanted way. If this is something you want to know more about, if you want to know more about the matrix assessment profile, if you want to know more about the potential causes and the potential impact that stress may be having on your life in terms of contributing to or causing chronic and unresolved symptoms, then I strongly advise you to click on one of the links after this dialogue is over, contact my office, send us an email, advise us of your interest, and by all means, seriously consider the fact that as part of our membership program, you're going to have access to this kind of dialogue on a weekly basis, live with me, 1 hour every week with my members, but also support audios every week where I spend an expanded period of time creating dialogues, explaining, instructing, guiding people in the membership program very specifically, not only in terms of what it is that I think you should know about, but in terms of a response to the things that you feel are most important to you at this particular point in your life. So all of these things are available as part of the Matrix transformation program, if you will, as well as many other tools, books and audios and articles and videos. So if any of these things are of interest to you, by all means, let us know and we'll provide you with the information, with the links, with the access to be able to participate in this process. And we're developing right now another opportunity for you to be able to experience everything that I've just described at substantially lower prices, and many of them for a limited time at no price or very little financial involvement at all. So not to sell or oversell the product itself, the process itself is what's important here. And I do want to share it with you. I do want you to have every opportunity to engage this without feeling like you've committed yourself financially or time-wise to something that is of no interest to you, is of no benefit to you, is of no value to you. This is something I've spent the last 40 years developing and hopefully perfecting to the extent that you can perfect anything. And it's something that I obviously am passionate about, and I want to share it with you. So that being said, I'm going to be here again in a couple of weeks, and I'm going to be sharing some more details about how this process works, about what the significance of certain experiences are, about how we turn symptoms into solutions. And so until then, even if you cannot participate for whatever reason or choose not to participate at this particular point, please join me again in 2 weeks when I'll be here to share more insight with you about the world beyond medicine as we continue to explore a new way of thinking. I'm Dr. Richard DiCenso. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here today. I look forward to seeing you in a couple of weeks.